Hello, everyone. Welcome to Auntie M's Musings, where I go down theological rabbit holes and see what I can find. In this video, I'm going to be continuing my exploration of Genesis mythology by looking at a couple of stories about murder among siblings, one from the Bible and one from ancient Egypt. Why ancient Egypt? Because Moses, the guy who is credited with writing all these stories down in the first place, was born and raised there, in the imperial palace no less, and also because I can't resist comparing two stories that could almost be referencing the same event, told from different perspectives and sets of memories. Our story begins once upon a time with two brothers. The eldest is Cain. He's a farmer, which tells us immediately that this is much an allegory as the Garden of Eden, but that's beside the point. Anyway, here's Cain farming away. He has a younger brother named Abel, who is a pastoralist. That means he keeps sheep. Things would be fine and dandy, except that Cain, for whatever reason, resents his brother Abel. Probably because Abel does everything right and Cain just doesn't measure up. Ever. One fine day, both brothers go to offer gifts to God. Abel, being a shepherd, brings a sheep. Cain, as a farmer, brings grain. Now, Genesis only gives us the Cliff Notes version of events, so we don't actually know the details about why or how this happened. We only know that Abel's offering was accepted, and Cain's wasn't. Now, this is pretty embarrassing and awful. It's like trying to compete at the county fair with your brother, and your little brother's stupid sheep wins a prize, while your perfect, amazing corn gets disqualified. Okay, so maybe you cheated, and maybe you were doing some fast talking behind the scenes, and maybe you strong-armed a couple of people or whatever, but you were supposed to win, and now you can't even compete. When Cain went to complain about it, this is the answer he got. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Which basically tells us that Cain was already not a good guy, and whatever his motive was for making an offering to God, piety and devotion wasn't it. Back in the fields, Cain and Abel start talking, or arguing more like, and then Cain loses his temper. He kills Abel, and then he gets rid of the evidence. Then God shows up again with a question. Where is Abel thy brother? Cain tries to hide his crime by saying, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? But of course there's no hiding crimes from God. Cain is punished immediately with a curse. He's no longer a farmer. Because he planted his brother's murdered corpse in order to hide it, he will no longer be able to plant anything at all. Nothing will grow for him ever again. Of course, Cain makes a big stink about how unfair it all is and how he's going to get killed when people find out what he's done, and then God puts some kind of mark on him to make sure people know that he's been punished already and can't be punished anymore. Heck of a tattoo that must have been. And Cain goes off with his wife. And how it is we haven't heard about the women before now is apparently, again, because this is the short version, to found the first city, since he can't be a farmer anymore. Meanwhile, back at home, Abel is still dead, and Eve is pretty upset about it. But then she gives birth to another son. She names him Seth, who becomes heir to everything. He has a son named Enos, and apparently that's when people start codifying the names of the gods, or whatever it means to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, this is where things get interesting, because Set is also the name of the brother of an agricultural god named Osiris, and that mythic allegory has some other fun parallels with the biblical story, too. In the myth of Osiris, the role of Abel is played by, no surprise, Osiris. See his fabulous ram's horns? That's one of his symbols, the ram. Set gets Cain's role. His symbol is a doggish sort of creature that isn't a jackal. Like Cain, Set is jealous of Osiris, but the contention isn't about an offering to God. It's about who gets to be God, specifically, who gets to be the ruling power of Egypt. And that's Osiris, of course. Thanks to Egyptology, we know a whole lot more about Osiris and Set and their whole family tree, or trees, since the stories change with time and location within Egypt, than we ever learn about Cain and Abel, like who their wives were, for example. The book of Genesis never mentions anything about Abel having a wife, but Osiris has one, Isis. Isis is one of the most powerful and popular deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon, and for good reason. She is clever, intelligent, a magician feared by even the elder gods for her power. She is also a devoted wife, a good daughter, a strong mother, and a stubbornly ethical being. Set's on-again, off-again spouse is Nephthys, and she is just as stubbornly ethical as her sister Isis. In the myth of Osiris and Set, as in the story of Cain and Abel, Set and Osiris duke it out for control of Egypt. Set wins, killing his brother, but in this story, Isis exists, and she is powerful enough to bring back the dead. To prevent that from happening, Set hacks up his brother's body into multiple pieces and scatters them all over Egypt. Now Set is king, but Isis is not happy about this, and neither is Nephthys. Nephthys joins her sister Isis, and Isis goes on a trip to reassemble her husband. Somewhere along the way during Isis's travels, she ends up bearing Osiris a posthumous son named Horus, whose symbol is the falcon. Because she's magic like that, and she needs all the help she can get. Set really doesn't want her to put Osiris back together again and makes things awfully difficult for her. But Isis prevails and manages to get almost all of Osiris's pieces and parts. She's missing one, which means that Osiris cannot ever be God King of living Egypt again. But that's okay. He'll be God King of the afterlife from now on. And a symbol of the agricultural cycle of life, death, and rebirth. That still leaves the question of who is to rule Egypt. Isis is adamant that Set is a usurper and a horrible person, and that her son Horus is the legitimate ruler. Set, of course, disagrees, and so another battle ensues. This time Horus wins, eventually. But he doesn't kill Set. Nope, Set just goes into the wilderness and becomes, again like Cain, a symbol of all the dark, scary, bad things in the world. The thing about these kinds of stories, whether it's Cain and Abel, Set and Horus, Romulus and Remus, or Shakespeare, they're all ways of legitimizing power through divine authority. Since defunct religions are easier to analyze than living ones, and since we've got a lot of archaeology about Egypt, I'll start there. During the formative period of Egypt, Set and Osiris were patron gods of competing city-states, and there was clearly a lot of bad blood between them. The worshippers of Osiris Horus won. Even so, one pharaoh throughout his entire reign did his best to reconcile the competing traditions, even changing his name twice to respect both. It didn't work. Set was the bad guy, Osiris the heroic victim, his son Horus his legitimate successor. History is written by the victors, and so is mythology. A similar pattern appears in the story of Cain, Abel, and Seth. Interestingly, although Cain had a wife and children and descendants who continue being troublesome, there is no mention of Abel's family, either before or after his death, the assumption being that there weren't any. The spiritual inheritance of Adam that would have gone to Abel and presumably his heirs goes to his posthumously born younger brother Seth instead, and to Seth's descendants after him. There's another switch in the time of Noah. He has 3 sons, but the youngest one, doesn't really count. The eldest one, Ham, conveniently disposes of himself by being disrespectful to his drunken father, giving the second son, Shem, the opportunity to step into his spot. Incidentally, this is a really blatant jab at Egypt, who are, in this version of events, Ham's descendants. It's as much as saying, hey, you might think you're all that in a bag of chips, but even if you have more political power, it's us who have the actual authority to speak for God. So there. From Shem, the line goes to Abraham, and the rest of Genesis is an explanation and justification for why, among all of Abraham's descendants, only the line of Jacob truly has the authority to speak for God. But did Jacob's family really have a monopoly on speaking for God? Of course not. In the Book of Mormon, Alma states quite clearly, "For behold, the Lord doth grant unto all nations of their own nation and tongue to teach his word, yea, in wisdom, all that he seeth fit that they should have." The thing is that the book of Genesis wasn't written for everyone on the planet, even though it has important lessons that we can all learn from. The book of Genesis was written for a very specific group of people in a very specific time and place. Cain and Abel, Osiris and Set, all the gods of Egypt, Sumeria, Syria, and the Levant, the world they knew was a whole lot smaller than ours, and they are only one part of the story of people. A really important and influential part, certainly, but there are a lot of other stories out there, and those stories matter too. Thanks for listening.